Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. This is part 3 of our series on Exodus chapter 11, the death of the firstborn. And today we're going to finish up the chapter and talk about why we have such a strange transition in chapter 12, verse 1. So we're picking it up in verse 7 of chapter 11, and I'll begin by reading from my translation of the Hebrew. We've already had the announcement of the death of the firstborn of Egypt. Now the topic is shifting to how Israel is going to be affected by the death of the firstborn. But for any of the children of Israel, no dog will threaten, neither human nor animal, so that you may know that Yahweh distinguishes between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants will come down to me and bow down to me, saying, "Leave, you and all the people at your feet." So afterward I will leave. And he left Pharaoh in the heat of anger. Yahweh said to Moses, "Pharaoh will not listen to you, so that my wonders may multiply in the land of Egypt." So Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, but Yahweh strengthened Pharaoh's heart, so he did not send the Israelites away from his land. So this is the end of Moses' speech to Pharaoh in their last audience together, and we find out that there's going to be a final distinction between Egypt and Israel. As with some of the other signs and wonders, there's a separation so that what affects the Egyptians will not affect the Israelites. And things will be so peaceful in the land of Goshen where Israel lives that not even a dog will growl out of a sense of alarm. In verse 8, we see the word leave happen 3 times. Leave, you and all the people at your feet. So afterwards, I will leave. And he left Pharaoh in the heat of anger. So there's a strong emphasis here on the leaving of Egypt. And Moses is anticipating that by the time this thing rolls out, the Egyptians are going to want us gone. They're going to be the ones telling us to leave. But then there's this symbolic departure where Moses turns and leaves Pharaoh in the heat of anger. Pharaoh has not told him, okay, go now. He did at the end of chapter 10 tell him, I don't want to see your face again. But their encounter didn't end until verse 8, when Moses of his own accord turns and leaves. This is symbolic of Moses' growing authority, his sense of sharing God's anger over the situation, sharing a righteous anger about the oppression of the Israelites, for which Pharaoh is refusing to take responsibility and correct his ways. Moses leaving Pharaoh is symbolic because soon the people will be leaving Egypt altogether. So we're getting a sneak preview here of where things are going. Verses 9 and 10, then, the last part that I read, are a kind of summary of this entire series of narratives. Not only does it recap the signs and wonders that God has done, but it reminds readers of how God is using Pharaoh's recalcitrance, his stubbornness, to work for his own ends. So Pharaoh's refusal to listen has given the opportunity for Yahweh to multiply wonders. If Pharaoh had agreed right in the beginning, the people would actually not have as full an idea of the extent of Yahweh's power. And so here there's an emphasis again on the multiplication of wonders and on the effect of Pharaoh's stubbornness. Many people who read Exodus struggle, or who are aware of this story perhaps but aren't reading it closely, really struggle with the violence of God in this book, especially in this sequence of narratives, and now especially with the death of the firstborn. It seems like, how could a good God proceed to kill the firstborn of an entire population of Egyptians when many of them were innocent? That approach to this story presumes a couple of things. It presumes, first of all, that God is the one being violent, when in fact, the book's been clear that Pharaoh was the violent one. Pharaoh was oppressive. Pharaoh was the one who was exploiting the labor of the Israelites and refusing to give them any kind of rest, refusing Yahweh's demands. So the violence in this book starts with Pharaoh. Often, in order to rein in the violence or put a stop to the violence of an angry ruler, it's necessary to use violence in response to bring a close to that. The other assumption that's made when people are really struggling with the violence of this book is the assumption is The Egyptians are innocent. They shouldn't have to pay for what Pharaoh has done. But the fact is, there would be no authority for Pharaoh were it not for all of the people who were complicit in it. The Egyptians are participants in the oppressive rule of Pharaoh. They are neighbors who turn a blind eye to the kind of human exploitation that's going on all around them. And so the dramatic measures that God has to take here could have been avoided if the Egyptians themselves had revolted against the oppressive rule of Pharaoh. If Pharaoh had listened to Yahweh's demands, all of this death could have been avoided. So it doesn't feel quite right to me to blame God for these deaths when Pharaoh is the one who has refused all of the gentler warning signs that have led to this moment. The actual death of the firstborn doesn't occur in the narrative until chapter 12, starting in verse 29. What happens in between? That's quite a long stretch, 28 verses in chapter 12 that are an interruption of what's been a very epic narrative. This narrative sequence is interrupted by a long block of ritual instruction about how the Israelites are to prepare for the night on which the firstborn will die. Why is this here? Why interrupt this great story with a bunch of details and instructions? Well, there's an immediate payoff, an immediate purpose, and a long-term purpose. The immediate purpose is to ensure Israel's readiness to follow God's instructions. He gives them instructions so that they can practice listening to the sound of his voice and obeying. He's not asking them to do anything terribly difficult in chapter 12. He's asking them to have essentially a dinner party. But their seriousness about following God's instructions will prepare them to continue to listen to his voice as they go into the wilderness. It also is a signal of their identification with the covenant people of God. They need to make their choice. Are they going to throw in their lot with Pharaoh and his gods, or are they going to throw in their lot with Yahweh and his representatives, Moses and Aaron? The ritual texts also give the people time to prepare to leave. There's a gap between the selecting the animal and slaughtering it. And so there's time for everyone to prepare for this big journey that they're about to go on. So that's the immediate effect or the immediate payoff of this interruption of the narrative. But there's also a very important long-term payoff for the ritual instructions here. And most of us probably just skim through these. I don't need these instructions. I'm not going to be slaughtering a sheep or a goat, so I don't need to read this carefully. But it's actually really important that every generation of Israelites practices the Passover, keeps the Passover. Passover is the name for this yearly festival that arises from this moment in history. The yearly ritual ensures that future generations will see themselves as the people God saved from Egypt. There's no such thing as a second generation Israelite in the biblical narrative. The Bible presents covenant faith as always being first generation. So by celebrating the Passover year after year, by following these ritual instructions, every generation is in on it. They've experienced God's rescue in a tangible way. They've tasted and smelled and touched the sensory experience of being rescued from Egypt so that they can have a sense of identity that's shaped by that really, really important event. God does not want someday for the people to be like, yeah, way back many generations ago, my dad was a slave in Egypt and God set him free. He wants every generation to be able to say, we were slaves in Egypt and God set us free. And this very tangible ritual experience that involves all ages, children participate, middle-aged, older people all participate together. It's a family communal experience in reenacting the Exodus, and that ensures that everyone cultivates this sense of identity. So I hope that's helpful in preparing us for moving into chapter 12. We are going to take a brief break for Torah Tuesday for the month of August, and so you can take a few weeks to catch up if there are videos you haven't watched yet, and then we'll hit it again in September with chapter 12. I hope you're enjoying your month, and I hope you've enjoyed this series. Thanks and have a great week.